Queen's coffin makes its final journey to Windsor Castle, where the late monarch will be reunited with her beloved husband. Tonight on the evening news, as we go over the key events of the day's funeral. Also this evening, the 2-minute silence and the Piper's laminate draws to the Queen's funeral to a close. The funeral service for Her Majesty the Queen, the UK's longest serving monarch, has concluded at Westminster Abbey. And flowers, music and jewellery, the personal touches to the Queen's state funeral. The service is filled with historic symbolism, with much of it including a touching nod to the Queen's husband, the Duke of Edinburgh.
This is STV Evening News with Stephen Woolridge.
Good evening. The Queen's coffin has arrived for the last stage in the late monarch's journey to be reunited with her beloved husband. The state hearse carrying the Queen escorted towards Windsor by dozens of Grenadier Guards in close protection around their commander. Behind them were members of the household cavalry and members of the family. Many flowers were thrown by well-wishers along the route, remained on the bonnet and roof of the hearse. The long walk to the castle was lined with members of the armed forces on either side, stood in front of tens of thousands upon thousands of members of the public. The silence fell among crowds of mourners as the hearse turned into long walk in their final stretch of the late monarch's journey. Earlier, hundreds of thousands of well-wishers lined the route of the funeral procession through the capital and beyond to say their last goodbyes, while millions around the globe watched the state funeral proceedings on TV. The Queen's coffin was placed gently into the state hearse before a sea of colourful military personnel bands and some cavalry gathered around Wellington Arch. The transfer from the gun carriage to the vehicle took place in a still silence as the King, the Queen Consort and other senior members of the royal family stood to its side just meters away. The King and the Queen Consort could be seen leaning their heads together to exchange a few words at one point. Princess Charlotte stood between her parents, and the Prince and Princess of Wales clasped her mother's hand. The King and military personnel all saluted as the state hearse pulled away and the national anthem was played. As the court made its way through the streets, roses and other flowers were thrown towards the hearse. Cheers and applause rang out among the packed crowds. The King and Queen Consort and members of the royal family in the hearse to Windsor by car ahead of the procession at St George's Chapel, where a committal ceremony will take place from 4 p.m. The King and his siblings walked behind the coffin as it left Westminster Abbey this afternoon following the state funeral, while other royals travelled by car. Noreen Roberts, who watched the procession in London after losing her friend on the same day the Queen died, said she imagined them in heaven together after the coffin was borne along the Mall. Miss Roberts, 63, from Hitchin, Hertfordshire, said she felt the late monarch's presence as the court passed. I definitely felt her presence today. It was nice to feel close to her one last time, she said. For such a little person, she had this huge presence. I lost my friend on the same day she died, and I can imagine the two of them up there at the pearly gates. STV News correspondent Emily Morgan, who was on the A4 as the hearse went by, said, as it is rounded the corner onto the A4, a hush descended. As it came past me, there was spontaneous eruption of clapping, people cheering. I don't think anyone expected that to happen. This was a real outpouring of love and grief. There are still people standing here now, I think they're finding it difficult to walk away, to accept that this moment, for them at least, is over. Now, sticking with the funeral today of Her Majesty the Queen Elizabeth, the funeral service for Her Majesty, the UK's longest serving monarch, concluded at Westminster Abbey at 5 p.m. with a lament played by the Sovereign's Piper. The 2,000 or so attendees, led by King Charles and other members of the royal family, observed a 2-minute period of silence that was mirrored across the UK, singing the national anthem. State trumpeters from the Household Cavalry sounded the last post following the Archbishop of Canterbury's condemnation over the Queen's coffin and a blessing pronounced by the Dean. The lament then echoed around the Abbey before the coffin was carried from outside for the short journey to Wellington Arch, followed by the royal family. The emotion of occasion showed on the faces of the King and Consort as they followed the coffin from Westminster Abbey. The Duke of York was seen to bow his head. The crowds lining the route were largely still and quiet. Minute guns were being fired in Hyde Park by the King's Troop Royal Horse Artillery, and Big Ben tolled throughout the duration of the procession. The Queen's coffin procession passed Buckingham Palace with members of the public lining the Mall, breaking into a round of applause as the state gun carriage moved by. The King's Guard turned out in the forecourt of the palace to give a salute to the coffin at the Queen Victoria Monument. The royal family had earlier escorted the coffin to the Abbey to honour the life of Queen Elizabeth II at her death at the age of 96. The state gun carriage, the same that carried her father, transported the coffin to the Abbey and was carried inside by the bearer party of Grenadier Guards ahead of the state funeral service. Mourners who follow the Queen's example and inspiration of trust in and faith in God can with her say, "We will meet again," the Archbishop of Canterbury has said. Justin Welby told attendees that grief felt across the world arises from the Queen's abundant life and loving service, now gone from us. The King was seen reading silently from the order of service during the prayers, while the Queen Consort, seated to his left, listened intently. The coffin has been draped in the royal standard and carries the imperial state crown and a wreath of flowers containing plants from the gardens of Buckingham Palace, Clarence House and Highgrove House. A note on the coffin read, "In loving and devoted memory, Charles R." Well, that's where we're going to leave the evening news for this evening. I will be back with a special news at 10, so I hope you can do that. But from me and the rest of the team here, good night.